This is the journey of Gordon Parks. Hosting this conversation with Gordon Parks is Dr. Janetta Cole, former president of Spelman College and now a professor at Emory University.
Mr. Parks, surely you could feel the deep, deep warmth, the respect, the affection that those who are here feel for you and for your work. You are esteemed as a photographer, as a filmmaker, as a novelist, as a poet, as a painter. But we must begin somewhere, especially since we are thinking now of a journey. And I'm going to ask you to help us to begin by taking us to Kansas.
It's a little difficult at times to think back to Kansas and the things that I experienced there. The good things and the bad things. There are plenty of both. I have never forgotten those things because they gave me strength. And my mother's words to me, and she said them quite often, "Don't come home crying to me because somebody didn't give you something because you were black. You know, if a white boy can do it, you can do it." And she said, "You'd better do it." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." After my mother died and I was 15, I realized I was on my own. And I remember my father wanted me to go north, my mother wanted me to go north before she died. And my father promised that I would be sent to Minnesota to live with my sister. He stood by the old taxi cab that was called Dan Stover's taxi cab, and he didn't look at me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Just follow your mama's teachings, boy, and you'll be all right." You know? And years later, when I needed it most, I followed mama's teachings, and that's what guided me along the way.
I'd also like you to take us now on this journey from Kansas to that moment when you got your first job.
When I landed in Minnesota, I met my brother-in-law, who didn't really like children. And he let me know the first night I was there. And at just Christmas time, it was 35 degrees below zero, and that was the night he chose to have an argument with me. And I was foolish enough to argue back with him, and he was a large man, and he thrust me out into the snow and 35 degrees below zero. I hung out at a pool hall down the street, and you asked me about my first job. Well, I don't know whether or not you would call it a job, but it was a very nefarious position. It was a piano player in a brothel.
And in a way, I could call that piano playing a weapon, an instrument for survival. It was a way for a 15-year-old boy to make it in this world. But that reminds me, Mr. Parks, that you have used particular language about another instrument, not a piano, but a camera. Let me use one of my few Yiddish words, chutzpah.
Chutzpah.
What else could explain that you walk into a department store with this little weapon of yours and say that you will do fashion photography?
Well, you're thinking Frank Murphy's store.
I'm thinking about Murphy's department store.
Yeah, it was the most extravagant store in the Northwest. Rich, strictly for rich women. I don't know until today what propelled dragging me into that rich man's store and asked for Frank Murphy. Frank Murphy says, "Here I am, what do you want?" "I want to shoot fashions." He said, "We get our fashions done in New York and Paris and London," and he went on and on. I felt smaller and smaller and smaller. And he just about had me out the door when Madeline, his wife, who looked to be 10 feet tall, said, "Frank, what does the young man want?" He said, "He wants to shoot fashion," and now he's pushing the door closed. She said, "Frank, how do you know he can't shoot fashions?" He said, "Madeline," he groaned. And she said, "Come here, young man. Sit down in that chair. Can you shoot fashions?" And I lied and said, "Yes, ma'am." And so Frank groaned again. He says, have you any of your work?" "No, ma'am." "Well, I'm going to give you a chance. The store closes tomorrow at 6 o'clock. You arrive here at 6:30 and we'll be waiting for you." Frank groaned again. I went back, frightened to death, because I never expected to go this far. You know, the models dressed and I started shooting. Frank looked. He was suddenly impressed. Madeline was impressed, and even I was impressed. That is, until about 12 o'clock at night when I developed the film. I had double exposed everything but one picture. The next morning I had that big 16 by 20 print up on an easel sitting in front of Frank Murphy's store. When Frank and Madeline walked up, she said, "Oh, Gordon, it's beautiful. Where are the rest of them?" Well, I told her the truth. And she said, "Would all of them have been that good?" I said, "Oh, that's the worst one of all." So she said, "Okay, we're going to do it all over again, but no double exposure this time." I said, Now, you know, down through the years, and I'll jump ahead a little. When I finally landed at Vogue magazine years and years later, I did my first big fashion series at Vogue. I got a cable from Madeline saying, "I saw your work in Vogue. I see you're not double exposing anymore. And when I get to New York, I want to take you to the plaza for dinner." So we went to dinner, and Madeline said, "Well, Gordon, I'm so proud of you." I said, "Well, thank you, Madeline." I said, "You helped me. You gave me that first break in my life."
From high fashion, the most gorgeous of women, jewelry, elegance, richness. From that to capturing with that same weapon of yours, Miss Ella Watson.
You talk about American Gothic, it possibly become my signature picture, and it was inspired by the cruelty of discrimination and bigotry. I had gone to work with the Farm Security Administration in Washington, D.C., which was a group of the finest documentary photographers assembled in Washington to somehow or another get across to the American public that a lot of people were losing their homes and their farms, the farmers, and people were destitute after the Hoover administration. And Roy Stryker, who was the head of the organization, which was under Franklin D. Roosevelt, took me on. after seeing some of the work that I had done on the south side of Chicago with black poverty-stricken people. And he says, put your camera up on the shelf. I'm going to give you an assignment. I want you to go to Julius Garfinkel's department store, buy yourself a top coat, go across the street to a lovely restaurant, have dinner, and then go to a motion picture, which is catacomb from there, and let me know what you think about that picture. Oh, it's a very strange assignment. You want me to put my camera up? Yes, put your camera up. I did. I went to Julius Garfinkel. Well, nobody could find my size in my top coat because nobody tried. I went across to the restaurant. The waiter looked at me and said, don't you know Negroes can't eat in this place? Go around the back if you want some food. That was an awakening. I had just come from Minnesota. I didn't even get in the theater, forget that. I went back, I hurried back to the Farm Security Administration at 14th and Independence. And Roy was sitting there, and he looked up at me and he smiled. He said, well, how did it go? I said, I think you knew how it went. He says, what do you intend to do about it? I said, I don't know. What can I do about it? He says, well, what'd you bring your camera down here for? I don't know. He said, but you just can't photograph a bigot and put bigot underneath his name. Doesn't work. And he left for the day. The only person left in the office was Ella Watson, a charwoman who was sweeping the floors, a rather spindly-looking woman with glasses. And I talked to her and I asked her about her life, and she stopped sweeping and she said, well, she started, my great-grandfather was lynched in Mississippi. And she went on down the line of the terrible things that had happened to her. Now she was taking care of 2 grandchildren on a salary of which was not enough for her. I said, may I photograph you? So she said, yes. Go, where do you want me to stand? I looked up, I said, right in front of that American flag. He said, in front of the flag? I said, yes, in front of the flag. I said, I hold a broom in one hand and a mop in the other. And then, you must remember, this is one of the first professional pictures I ever did. And so she said, well, I don't know about standing in front of the flag. I said, well, that's where I want you, you know. I said, I'll look straight into the camera. She looked at me. And I took the picture. And developed it, showed it to Roy Stryker 2 mornings later. He said, well, you're getting the idea, but you're going to get us all fired.
I would suggest we go to Harlem when we come back.
Okay, where's that?
You'll find out.
Still ahead, the doors to Hollywood finally open for a black filmmaker. We continue with the journey of Gordon Parks.
Miss Ella Watson, Red Jackson, Flavio, Mr. Parks, you have brought into the American consciousness real people. Tell us about that trip to Harlem that you did make and what it meant to gain the trust of Mr. Jackson.
Well, you're talking about the Harlem Gang story.
I'm talking about the Harlem Gang story.
I had gone to the office of Wilson Hicks, who was the toughest picture editor Life magazine ever had. I mean, he was really tough. And I had gone there unannounced, walked into his office, and put some pictures down on the desk and said, Mr. Hicks, my name is Gordon Parks. I'd like you to look at some of my pictures. He said, how did you get in here? I said, I just walked in. He said, well, walk the hell out. So I said, well, won't you look at a couple of my pictures first? I said, I've been waiting so long to see you. He said, no, I can't see your pictures. I don't have time. You don't just walk in someone's office and put pictures on their desk, you know. So I said, just one. Just look at the top one. And he said, okay. He looked at that one. He kept on looking. He kept turning them, flipping them over. So Wilson said to me, what do you want to do? I said, oh, the Harlem Gang story. He said, we did that last year and we got sued for $3 million because one of the boys turned out to be a minister's son. They faked it. I said, well, I can do it. Well, I didn't really know I could do it. I went to Harlem. I spoke to Jimmy Morrow, who was the detective I played tennis with. And he said, why don't you come down to the precinct, the Harlem precinct, and I don't know. In walked a young man, his name was Red Jackson. And he cursed the desk sergeant out. I can't believe this black kid's coming in there cursing out a desk white sergeant and is going to get out of here alive. So I said, who is that? He said, that's Red Jackson. He's the toughest gang leader in all Harlem. He said, if you can get him, you got somebody. I followed him out of the precinct. And he said, what do you want with me? I said, I want to infiltrate your gang.
That's all.
That's all. He said, are you kidding? I said, no, I'm not kidding. He said, why the hell should I want you hanging around me when things happening with my men? I don't want you. I told him I wanted to do a story for Life magazine. I started with him. Red trusted me. I gave him my trust. He gave me his. And I was able to do just about anything I want. There was some dangerous moments, but the laboratory at Life magazine fixed up an infrared camera for me so that when something happened, the opposite gang didn't know that I was shooting because they didn't see the light go off. But I had to be very careful day and night because I was one of the gang members. Now, Red disappeared off the scene after a while. Years later, I'm walking through Grand Central Station in New York, and somebody said, hi, Mr. Parks. I said, hi. He said, don't you remember me? I said, Red Jackson. He said, that's me. And he said, let me buy you a hot dog. And I said, fine. He bought me a hot dog. And he said, the story helped, you know. A lot of the guys got out of the gangs. Your story helped. And you know one thing? I'm in my 40s now. He was 16 when I found him. He said, I'm going to high school. I'm 40 years old, but I'm going to high school.
Parks.
And if sometimes you would like to go back with me, I'll go back to Harlem so we can save some of those other kids up there.
I'm feeling a pattern back to my sister, Ella Watson, my brother, Red Jackson.
Yeah.
These two extraordinary forces in American film. And yes, a young boy in a favela. Would you talk about Flavio?
Well, I had never seen such poverty in my life. I went to Rio. As I'm walking up the mountainside one day, I see this bony kid with a 5-gallon can of water on his head, just a pair of dirty pants, you know, struggling up the mountainside. And I was sitting beneath the jacamandra tree, and I looked up. He smiled. And he smiled a smile that I never will forget. And I smiled back at him. And I was with my interpreter, Jose Gallo. And I said, Jose, I want to follow that kid. That's poverty. Followed him to his shack. The mother, whose name was Nair, she finally said, you know, okay, you can stay and do a story. Well, the shack, couldn't have been more than 10 feet by 20 feet. Family of 7 children and mother and father all lived there. No running water there, no toilets, no electricity, of course, on the whole mountainside. It was the worst poverty I'd ever seen in my life. And Flavio, at 12, was already racked with bronchial asthma, malnutrition, possibly tuberculosis, and so forth. I cabled back Life magazine and said, the longest cable in my life, and said, I found a little boy called Flavio. He's absolutely beautiful, and he's dying. The doctors say he doesn't have much more than 6 months to live. This is a story. It's not a father and his family. This Flavio, people will respond to him. They will really do something. They said, it's your story. Go ahead. Flavio is your story. You got it. How long do you want me to stay? Stay as long as you want to get your story. I said, all right. So I stayed. Then, when the story was published, Americans responded. In less than 3 weeks, they had sent me $30,000 and said, you go back and get that kid. You can't leave him there to die. I put him on a plane to New York, first class. This kid, had him dressed up like a kid from Oxford. And the whole world was waiting for Flavio at the airport, TV cameras. He was the most popular kid in the hemisphere, And Flavio brought him, stayed in there 2 years in Denver, Colorado, who at a clinic who said that they would take him on for nothing. They would save his life. And they saved his life. I flew back from Paris the day that he left 2 years later. Just recently, I went back to see him. He was 12 when I found him. He's now 49, and a wonderful guy.
I'm hearing certain echoes of your own boyhood, which was not one of riches. It was not one free of bigotry. But again, Mr. Parks, what you did was to take art as a weapon. And through the learning tree, through the story of your own life, in many ways you told not only your life, you told the essence of what living is.
Well, the learning tree came about accidentally. I was at Life magazine one afternoon, and Carl Mailander, who's a writer and a photographer, said, we talk so much about your childhood in Kansas. You have a novel there. Why don't you write it? I said, Carl, I can't write a novel. He said, did you ever try? I said, no, I never tried. He said, why don't you go home this weekend and try? Just like that.
You hadn't been to creative writing school.
No, I had not
either.
been to school. I couldn't write and. So he said, go home and try this weekend. I said, all right, Carl. I went home that weekend and I wrote 7 triple-space pages. And I brought it back to Carl, showed it to him. He said, and forgot about it. That was Monday. On Tuesday or Wednesday I got a call from Mr. Evan Thomas, who wanted to take me to lunch. And I saw Carl later in the office. I said, Carl, I got a call from Evan Thomas who wants to take me to lunch. Evan called you? I said, yes. He said, do you know who that is? I said, no. He said, that's the executive vice president of Harper & Row Publishing Company. I said, you better go to lunch with me. He said, yeah, I had. So we went to lunch. We're taking off our wraps. We meet Evan Thomas. And he says, now, you have never written a novel before, Mr. Parks, but I'm willing here to offer you $5,000 for your efforts. We got halfway back. He said, I'll raise it to $7,500. I said, Mr. Thomas, he says, come on back. So we sat down at the table. He said, now the most I can offer you is $10,000. He says, you've never written a novel before. And in those days, $10,000 was a lot of money. So I said to him, I said, well, Mr. Thomas, I don't know whether I can write another word, but since you offer me all this money, I'm damn well going to try. The novel turned out to be very successful, bestseller. It turned out to be the Harper's Find of the Year.
Let's just take a quick break for a little TV business.
Okay.
All right.
When we return, Gordon Parks goes to Hollywood. We continue with the journey of Gordon Parks.
Here you are now, a filmmaker. I mean, You didn't go to film school. Mr. Parks, tell me about the learning tree.
One day I got a call from John Cassavetes, the actor in Hollywood. Said, Gordon, I just read The Learning Tree last night. You've got to make a film of that. I said, John, I would love to make a film of it. I'd love to have someone do it. But I said, raised him. He said, listen, not for someone else to do it. You do it. You're supposed to direct it. I said, there are no black directors in Hollywood, John. You know that. He says, I know that, but if you get out here, there may be one. You know what I mean? So I said, I can come. He said, well, be out here a day and a half from now, and I'll meet you in the afternoon and take you to Warner Brothers. I want you to meet Kenny Hyman, whose dad owns the studio. Now, Kenny and I don't speak with one another. We're angry, but I'll introduce him and I'll leave. So, all right. So I got there. He said, I also gave him a book called A Choice of Weapons, you know. And I said, all right. I get there at the studio. I meet Kenny Hyman. John Cassavetes says goodbye and leaves. First 5 minutes I was there. Believe this or not, Kenny Hyman said, we want to do your film. I said, oh? He says, yes. He says, now who would you like to write the screenplay? I said, I don't know anybody out here. He said, you wrote the novel, why don't you write the screenplay? I said, okay. So he said, you know, of course you're going to direct. Oh, yes. Now, Cassavetes tells me you're a composer. I said, and you want me to do the music? He said, yes. I said, okay, I'm ready. He said, I'm scared to death, meanwhile. He said, you're going to be the first black director in Hollywood, so we want you to produce it for Warner Brothers because you're going to need a lot of clout. You're going to have to be the boss. I said, why not? You know, just like that. He said, we're behind you 100%. And anything you need, you holler. He introduced me to 5 people who would be sort of my assistants, sort of producer types who work for Warner Brothers. And he introduced me at lunch. He said, now pick the one that you want to help you. All 4 of them grasped my hand and welcomed me. But there was one, there's a big, heavyset guy. He held back. He didn't take my hand or anything. He didn't tell me, give me his congratulations or anything else. His name is Bill. I'm not going to give you his last name. You don't know who he is. So after lunch, I went back to Kenny's office, and he said, well, who did you like? I said, I like Bill. He said, are you kidding? That honorary so-and-so. I said, he said, why do you want him? I said, I want to be his boss.
Mr. Parks!
Well, Bill, he was well known. He played Cannon, he played, I'll tell you who he was. They played the Fat Man and so forth and so on. He was a good actor. But here I was doing everything he wanted to do. He loved Orson Welles. And here I was doing the closest thing that, a little more than what Orson Welles had been assigned to. And he wanted to be a composer. He had a piano in his office. And he wanted to write. And he hadn't had a chance to write anything. So I was here, I was doing everything
that he had not done.
He hadn't had a chance to do. And he resented me, actually. But, you know, I realized who he was, what his problem was. I didn't pressure him. I learned as much from him. I said, they tell me you're good. That's why I hired you, okay? Now let's get along. And we got along. So when it came time for me to write the music, Hyman asked me who I wanted to assist me. I said, I want Bill. And he said, you want me? I said, yeah, after all, I want you, Bill. And Bill and I got to great friends. But he was talented, but he learned me since to use. I had been taught to be tolerant about things like that, not to worry about Bill's personality. If Bill was qualified to do the job, then that's the guy to get to do it, you know. But the Learning Tree was quite a success. The Library of Congress now has it as one of the most important films ever made. They have it in the file, so I'm happy about that. And I dedicated it to my mother and father.
From whom you learned. We're going to take just a small break. Thank you, Mr. Parks.
Next, Gordon Parks makes movie history with John Shaft. We continue with the journey of Gordon Parks.
Mr. Parks, there's always a danger that I'm seeing what is not there, but I don't think so. I think when I reconnect with your filmmaking, when I think about Shaft, I don't see anything immediately except dignity, African American dignity. I'm getting echoes again of Miss Ella Watson. Not African American, but there's Flavio, and there's Red. Would you share with us just a little bit about Shaft and how you saw the making of that film?
Well, I was concerned. I think MGM offered me Shaft. I was at first really reluctant to take it. I didn't think it was possibly my type of film, what I wanted to portray my work as. But then I thought it over, well, why not? Let's give it I may be able to produce a different kind of black hero that the young people can sort of look up to in a way, you know. And we rewrote the script because I didn't like the first script I read, and dignified the man somewhat. Didn't take his power away from him, but dignified him, you know. And my son David said, Dad, read Richard Roundtree. Just read him. I said, but he's never done a film, David. He's never been before a camera. The role's too big. I can't take that chance. He said, just read him, Dad. Let's see what happens. I said, okay. Richard came, and there were several very fine actors in the place. Richard told me later he just gave up when he saw them. But I like Richard's looks, and I asked him if he'd ever had a screen test. No. Did you ever want to be an actor before? No. I said, well, I tell you, my son wants you to be an actor. Here, take this script, go to lunch, read these lines, and when you come back, I want to talk to you, and you read those lines back to me. Okay. He came back, put a fake mustache on him, a gun holster on him, and a turtleneck sweater. And I read him the questions. And he just sort of threw it away. He didn't even try, which was really what saved him. He didn't try to act. He was just natural. When I looked at the rushes that evening, I called up Jim Aubrey in L.A. and said, look, Jim, I think I found Shaft. He said, well, get the rushes out here right away. I said, they're coming. And they came out. He said, he saw them, and he said, that's him. Grab him. My son David called me up on the opening night in Broadway in New York and said, Dad, I know it's 4 o'clock in the morning, but you got to get up. I said, David, I'm not getting out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning for anything. He said, get up, Dad, come up on Broadway, because you'll never see this again in your life. So I got up, 4 o'clock, I went up to Broadway. The line was around the block at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the ushers were selling tickets, getting people in the side doors at $10 a whop. I remember Jim Aubrey, who used to be with CBS, who was then the head of MGM. He was a tough guy. Again, they called him the Smiling Cobra. He says, Gordon, I want you to take that film to England. I said, well, Jim, I'll think about it. And I told Jim, I said, they're never going to understand this film in England. He said, just take it, just take it. I said, okay. So I took it. So at the press conference where I showed the film, one chap from the London Times got up and said, I say that, Mr. Parks. He says, now, what does soft mean, really? I said, well, it sort of means up yours. He said, and another one got up and he says, and this thing, this mother, these blokes walking around calling each other mother. I said, I'm sorry, a couple of women in the house, I can't tell you what that other part of it is. But it was a tremendous success. I enjoyed it.
Mr. Parks, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
All right.
The journey of Gordon Parks will return in a moment. We continue with the journey of Gordon Parks.
Mr. Parks, it's your belief in the human capacity to do. You had done things that you had never practiced or been taught. It's your belief in all of us that I think begins to characterize for me so much of your work. And now on this journey that you are clearly still very much on, here you are now in the world of painting. You haven't been to art school, have you, at some moment that you didn't tell us about?
My schooling stopped when I was 15 years old. A school out in Kansas a few years ago gave me my first high school diploma as an honorary. I got a degree. At Harvard, Princeton. I'm sorry, Princeton. Princeton gave me my 41st doctorate this year. So what Miss McClintock prophesied never happened.
You did not waste your parents' money. What are we going to say to young folk, though? I mean, you are such an expression, Mr. Parks, of lifelong learning. But what do we say to young folk who may, at this stage in their lives, decide they can just jump out of school and do what they want to do?
Well, if they don't want to do nothing, they can. But youth, as far as I see youth, our youth is the savior of our planet. They have it all there. I've had a lot of kids write me letters from all over the world. Learning Tree was published in 12 different languages, so was the choice of weapons. So I get letters from all sorts of letters from all sorts of young people throughout the world. And I'm very happy to hear them. I've had Gordon Parks Academy in New Jersey, the Gordon Parks Elementary School in Kansas City, Missouri, Learning Tree School in Dominican Republic, Learning Tree School outside Philadelphia. So these are all young people, and it gives me hope, And I would, I've always wished that I could have a seminar once a week, get kids from every ethnic group on earth, at least 2 of them, put them in a big auditorium and say, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And try to show them how they can do it and why they can do it and why they must have courage. And the main thing I would tell them is that you do not ever accept limitations on yourself. if there's something doable, you can do it, you know? And you just have to have faith in yourself. I would tell a girl who is blonde and blue-eyed that she maybe suffer some discrimination, bigotry for some brunette or redhead. So the blacks are certainly going to have suffered it, and so forth and so on. But my father, one of my father's favorite expressions was, you waltz around your enemy and do a foxtrot on their back. In other words, don't come home singing the blues. You can do it.
You can do it.
And that's what I've tried to do. I've left channels open. What I did suffer, you know, I've made the most of. I use those things that, if I have had a success, success has been because I have used those things that usually frustrate us to help me push ahead. I couldn't have written the books. If I'm performing on a piano and I'm composing and a chord strikes me in memory of something, some injustice that I suffered in Kansas or someplace in the world, that chord says it to me. And it builds me. Well, without that injustice, I couldn't have had that card. Do you understand? So that's the way one has to look at it. You can't walk around with bitterness in your heart. I say prayer every night, not only for my own family, but for the world, for these people here, people in Czechoslovakia, people in Rome, people in London, all over the world. Just 5 seconds of prayer for the world to make it a better world.
The journey of Gordon Parks will return in a moment. We continue with the journey of Gordon Parks.
Mr. Parks, the notion of journey sits so well because you are clearly a giant without a destination. It's a journey. It goes on and on and on. But permit me to ask where you see is that next spot, that next place in this ongoing journey. What's next?
Well, I see progress. It's very difficult to say. People ask me now, are things better? Let me give you just a quick, slight example. I walked into my bank in New York, a savings bank, a few months ago, and the teller said, "Oh, the vice president wants to meet you when you come in." I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, I just want to say hello to you." I said, "Okay, tell him I'm here." He came out, and he was a black man. I was absolutely amazed, you know. So we sat down, and I didn't give him 5 minutes. I gave him 15 minutes, you know. And I left and feeling very good, saying, "Hey, boy, things are really looking up here. This guy's vice president of the bank." And the very next day, this poor man in Texas is lynched behind the car on the highway. Now, if I were to tell his family that things are getting better, they'd say, "You're not looking in the right direction, brother." You understand? So things are going to happen like this. We can't expect to erase poverty. We can't expect to erase racism, bigotry, or discrimination overnight. We've had certainly enough time to do it. We haven't done it. But there are a lot of good things happening. A lot of good people out there. And I teach my children to accept individuals for what they are. I don't care what color they are. And that has been I cannot forget Mrs. Murphy. I cannot forget and I cannot forget Lieberman at Vogue, who gave me my first chance. I cannot forget Roy Stryker. You understand? That's what balances me off. And I can't forget my mother and my father, my black brothers and sisters who've helped me along the way. They all helped me. They're all a part of me. Now they're probably telling me, giving me a message. Take it out there. Preach it. Let your cameras do it. Let your fingers do it on the piano. Let your heart do it with poetry.
Well, clearly, Mr. Parks, we are not going to eliminate poverty and racism and sexism, all forms of bigotry, tomorrow.
Oh.
Maybe not the day after tomorrow. But in the process of doing that, thank you for making your camera, your films, your poetry, your novels, your music, your life, a loving weapon.
Thank you.